All right, here we go. Bottom of Kuf Yud Amud Beis. In order to learn Daf Kuf Yud Aleph, says the Gemara at the two dots as follows. We had said Nosan es hakesef la'anshe mishmar, that in the case scenario where there actually were yorshim, but somebody gave over the money to the anshe mishmar, to the kohanim of that particular mishmar. So then the Mishnah had said yesterday that the family is not allowed to get that money out of the kohanim. Why is that the case? Says the Gemara, Omar Abai Shma Mino Kesef Mechaper Mechza. We actually assume that when the money of the Gezel Hager ends up by the Kohanim, there's actually a shtickle kapara that takes place. And says the Gemara, Di ilo mechaper, because had there not been kapara, then Hava Amina Mahader Liyorshin, then I would have thought that since it shouldn't have anyways gone to the Kohanim, the halacha would have allowed for the return of the item back to the yorshim of the money, but we don't say that. My time, because it wasn't his intention to give it over to Anshe Mishmar. He really should have given it to the yorshim, but he didn't. So therefore, there must be some type of kapara that exists. And says the Gemara, Elamei Ata, if that's true, then what about achatas? Let's say that a person separates an animal to be brought as a chatas, shemesu be'aleha. And after the person separates the chatas, the person who purchased the chatas, who needs kapara, that person passes away. Now, tepuk lechulin. We should have assumed that the item should have gone to chulin because da'adaita dahachilo afrisha. His intention wasn't to bring the korban after he died. That's Yom HaMisa's mechaper, so he doesn't need the korban chatas anymore. Yet we still say that the animal which was separated as a chatas, it was already hufrash, that it should still be brought as a korban. Amri, that's different. You can't bring a raya from there because chatas shemesu be'aleha hilchas agmirila delamisa azla. That when we have a case scenario of a chatas where its owners passed away, it's a halacha gemirila, it's halacha l'mosh misinai, that the animal still needs to be brought. And that is why the animal is brought, so no raya from there. Elameata, fine, you answered up for a chatas, but what about for an asham? What about an asham shemesu be'alav, that if a person is bringing an asham and that person dies while they were bringing the asham, lepuk lechulin, there too, we should have assumed that it would have gone to chulin, da'adaita dahachi lo afrisha. Person didn't intend on bringing the korban asham when he was going to die. Again, Mises mechaper. There's no reason to assume that he should have brought the animal after he died. Why bring the asham? So it says the Gemara, interestingly, hilchas agmiri la kol shebechatas meisa be'asham roet. Very interesting halacha that when there is a din, this is a halacha l'mosh misinai, kol shebechatas meisa, that if we have a scenario where scenario X by a chatas would have been mesa, which is this case, like we just saw, where mesu be'aleha, then be'asham roet. Then by an asham, that same case scenario, the animal would be roeh ad yista'iv. We would take that animal, wait until it develops a mum, and then take the cash, and then it gets put l'nedava. El Me'ata says the Gemara, wait 1 second, jumping back into Yevamos. Yevama shenafla lifnei muka shchen. Let's say that there's two brothers. One of them is tall, dark, and handsome, and the other is not. The other is a muka shchen. Guy's covered in boils from head to toe. Not the most attractive chassan in the world. Now she's married to tall, dark, and handsome, but he died and they didn't have children. So state in the Torah, she falls to ibum to the muka shchin. It says the Gemara, tepuk below chalitza. We should have assumed in such a case scenario that she doesn't marry the muka shchin because there was never a chance she would have ever married the muka shchin. She did not marry the first guy with the knowledge that she'd end up marrying the muka shchin. Had she done that, she never would have married the first guy. Listen to this, is that the havamin of the Gemara is, we won't paskin this way, but the havamin of the Gemara is that had she thought about the fact that the brother is a muka shchin, she married tall, dark, and handsome, but the brother is a muka shchin. But now that she's in the scenario of yibum, of having to marry the muka shchin out yibum, it's mafkia the kedushin the mafreya to tall, dark, and handsome, because her intent was never to marry this guy, which means be'etzem, her first marriage was a sham. That's the havamina, but very powerful havamina. The mafreya, havamina, but we're going to reject it. Correct. Adaita dahachi is a very powerful svara, but we're 0 for 3. We tried it by asham and failed. We tried it by chatas and failed, and we tried it by yibum and failed. Why over here does it fail? Because lamaisa she needs chalitza. Why does she need chalitza with the mukashchin? Hare, she would never marry the mukashchin. What? No, it's a halachic assumption, but not exeris hakasuv. Says the Gemara, last few words on Kuf Yud Amud Beis. Hasam, in regards to the case of the woman marrying the mukashchin, anan sadeh, we make an assertion on her behalf. It's as though we testify, the meinach nichala b'choldehu. She would marry an anybody, which is not the most flattering of circumstances for the guy. Why? Kiresh Lakish, and we've seen this in Yevamos and in Ksuvos and in Kedushin. Says the Gemara, because to Amar Rish Lakish tav lemesav tandu milemesav armalu. She would much rather have two bodies than have only one body. She'd much rather be married to a someone than to be married to a no one. I have a feeling in today's culture that's not true. I have a feeling that tav lemetav tandu in 2024 would not pan out the same way. We've already been seeing in our culture the average age of, not in our community as much, but in the secular culture, the average age of marriage is older and it's happening less frequently. People are living a different lifestyle altogether. As a Moel, I have done numerous cases of mothers who've conceived through sperm banks and sperm donors, which present fascinating shilas. But nevertheless, those people did not say tavel. They could have married somebody. Somebody would have married them, but they didn't. It wasn't tavel of tandu of armum. So I'm curious. I'm just postulating on my own. Would we say this halachic principle in 2024 is still the psyche of the average woman? And I would imagine the answer is no. You agree, Dad? Yeah. I think the culture has shifted a lot, and I don't know when it shifted. But if you live in the shtat, like everyone's a fruma yid, and you're the only girl basically not married in your neighborhood, then I could understand tavul of tandu, but not in our culture. I just, but that back in the day, Pashut, yeah. Maskim, Reish Lakish.
It might still be
Here, it's different still, but would we say tavul lemetav? Yeah, please don't listen to me because I'm just postulating. I'm not saying anything halachic. I'm just curious. But the Gemara here, Lamaisa, says that she has to do yibum or chalitza to the mukashchin. We don't say that she's mafkia her kedushin lemafreya to guy number one because daita dehachi she never would have married guy number one knowing that she would have ever ended up with the mukashchin. We don't say that, but it does present an interesting question about the applicability of tav lemeta. The Gemara on the top of Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph continues in the Brisa. We had spoken about Nasan es Kesev LeYehoyariv. We know that there were 24 mishmaros. Each mishmar served in the Beis Hamikdash for a week at a time. The first was Yehoyariv, and the second was Yedaya. So what we were talking about is if a person does Gazel Hager, they steal, and then they're Hoda. So then they're obligated to give Keren, Chomesh, and Asham. That's the basic din. But what if I gave the Keren and Chomesh to Yehoyariv, to the first Mishmar, and I gave the Asham to Yedaya, to the second of the Mishmar? So that was what we were talking about. Tanu Rabban on the Brisa, 3 lines down on Kuf Yud Aleph says, Nasan Asham LeYehoyariv v'Kesef Liyad. That's out of order. Remember, our Mishnah said that you have to give the money first and the korban after. And if you do it out of order, you have to redo the Asham. So our Bryce over here says as follows: if you give the Asham to Yehoyariv, which was Mishmar number 1, and the Kesef to Yedaya, which is Mishmar number 2, and it's backwards, Asham doesn't come first, money comes first. Yachzir Kesef Eitzel Asham di Rabbi Yehuda. Then the money that was given to Yedaya has to go back to number 1 so that everything can be done in proper sequence. That is Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to analyze this shita significantly before we get to the end of the page. And as you can see at the end of the page, always good to see bold words, meaning that we're finishing a parak. That's the Rabbi Yehuda in 5 lines down. No, the asham that you gave to Yehoyariv, to the current mishmar, that gets switched over to Yedaya. We don't give the money to the asham, we give the asham to the money. Hey Chidami, what's the case? Says the Gemara, Ilema, if you want to say that it's a very clean case, that the Yoivle Asham le Yehoyariv, b'mishmarto de Yehoyariv, you gave the Asham to Yehoyariv in the week that it was their mishmar. The Kesef liyade b'mishmarto de Yedaya, Kesef de Yedaya b'mishmarto de Yedaya, and you gave the money to them at the right time. Zezacha b'shalov, zezacha b'shal. that's fine because you didn't break protocol, right? You gave everyone what they were supposed to get at the right time. Ella, what must be the case? Amar Rava, hacha b'maya skinan, do you have asham liYehoyariv b'mishmarta liYehoyariv? Yes, you gave the money. You gave the asham to Yehoyariv during that first mishmar, but v'kesev liyadaya b'mishmarta liYehoyariv. The money was given over to Yadaya, but they gave it to the wrong group because it was still the mishmar of Yehoyariv. Then Rabbi Yehuda Savar kevan delav mishmeres to Yadayahi, because when the money was given over to Yadaya, it was still week number 1. It was still the mishmar of Yehoyariv. Therefore, liyadaya kansinanle, we slap Yadaya on the wrist, that second mishmar, and they have to give it back. Hilkach yachzer kesef etzel asham. The Rabbanon Savre, the rabbi who said the reverse, they said, Savre, shelo kedinhu abud b'nei Yehoyariv the kiblu asham mekame kesef. The first group, why are you taking the asham before you take the kesef? State in the Gemara, you're not allowed to do that. That when there is gezel hager, keren v'chomesh has to be paid first, and asham has to be paid later. So you haven't done your halachic due diligence to make sure that people are getting the right things in the right order, and therefore hilkach lididhu, it's Yehoyariv that's konsinanle, that they lose out on the asham, and therefore v'yachzer asham eitzel kesef machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanon. And Tanya, the Gemara presents over here, we're going to see 3 different brisas, one after the other, and that will bring us to the 2 dots at the second of the middle width lines. Says the Gemara about a third of the way down on Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph Tanya, Amar Rebbe, Ledivre Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda that we saw at the top of the page, that in the case where the asham was given to Yehoyariv and the money was given to Yadaya, the money goes back to Yehoyariv. Says the Gemara that according to that, in Kidmu b'nei Yehoyariv krivu esa asham, if the first mishmar sacrificed the asham, then yachzor v'yavi asham acher, then that was invalid. And you need to go get another animal, v'yakrivehu b'nei Yadaya, and the second group will have to bring another asham. Why is it that if Yehoyariv was makriv the asham, that it's puzzle? Because it was prior to the giving of the money. And when we have gezel hager, we have to make sure that keren v'chomesh is first and the asham is second. But if you do the asham first, as was the case in this brisa, it's invalid, and you have to bring another asham. And v'zachu halalu b'masha b'yadan. And that which Yedaya sacrificed, that which was sacrificed by Yehoyariv, they actually get to keep it. B'masha b'yadan. So says the Gemara, Amre l'may chazi. I don't understand. If you brought the asham before the money was brought, what do you mean that they get to keep it? It was an invalid korban. Says the Gemara, asham pasulhu. Amar Rava, don't worry. Le'oro, we're only talking about the hides of the animal, that you're right. It's inappropriate to consume the meat of this animal because the asham was brought out of order, that by gezel hager, you first have to give the financial consequence. And only afterwards can you give the korban. And if you bring the korban early, halacha l'maisa, the asham doesn't count. But what can you keep? You can keep the or. That's brisa number 1. And halfway down, about 10 lines before the middle width lines, the Gemara brings brisa number 2. Tanya, Amar Rebbe, L'divrei Rebbe Yehuda, im kayim asham, if the asham is still alive, yachzir asham eitzel kesef, then the money should be brought to the kesef. This is what Rebbe says in the name of Rebbe Yehuda. But this poses a problem, because in the brisa that we started at the very top of this page at the 3 dots, there, Rabbi Yehuda, yachzir kesef eitzel asham isle. This brisa that we just saw here in the middle of the page says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda that the asham goes to the money. But at the top of the page, Rabbi Yehuda said that the money goes to the asham, the exact opposite. So how can we fix this seeming stira between the brisa at the top of the page and the brisa in the middle of the page? Yeah, we're talking about a case where, yes, the wrong thing was given to the wrong mishmar, but the mishmar of Yehoyariv ended, and nobody said boo. Nobody recognized what happened. And says the Gemara, that there was considered to be just a mechila. and that mechila is considered to be a different case scenario. And that's why in the Bryce at the top of the page, Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that the money should go to the Asham. And over here, where the Mishmar of Yehoyariv ended, it's the reverse because there was a mechila of sorts by Yehoyariv's Mishmar having ended. And that brings us to the third Brysa, 2/3 of the way down, 5 lines before the end of the narrowest lines. Amar Rebbe says, L'divrei Rebbe Yehuda, im kaim asham yachzer kesef eitzel asham. This sounds similar to the Bryce that we saw at the top of the page, that if the asham is still around, then the money goes to the asham. So says the Gemara, Pshita, that's obvious. Hachi isle. That's what we have too. Namely, the brisa that starts 3 lines from the top of the page and the brisa that's 2 lines before the wide lines say the same exact thing, which is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the kesef goes to the asham and not the other way. So why do we have 2 brisas that say the same thing? With the last brisa, we asked, why do we have 2 brisas that say opposite things? Here they seem to agree. To this, the Gemara responds, Hacha b'maya skinan ki gondenafik mishmartam dehani udehani. This brisa over here, we have a different case scenario where not only did the Mishmar of Yehoyariv end, but even the second Mishmar of Yedaya also ended. And now we're in week 3 of the Mishmar. And uvelo tivao. And in neither week did anybody say anything about the fact that money was given over in the order in which it was given over. Maybe we should assume that whatever Yehoyariv had, they held on to. Whatever Yedaya had, they held on to. Kamash malan de amrinan kaven de lo tivai, because nobody claimed it. Lehadru beresha, we need to give it back to its original owners. What does that mean? It doesn't mean owners actually. What it means is yachzer kesef eitzel asham, like Rabbi Yehuda says that the kesef has to go to wherever the asham was, even though we're no longer in the same mishmar that we used to be. But we follow the same principles once we're out of both the first and second mishmar. Again, very nuanced, very halachic, and we have to have a good tfisa, an understanding of what gezel hager is, and that there's a financial component, and that there's a korban component, the chule. And continuing in this idea, on the second of the middle width lines, the Gemara quotes from our Mishnah from yesterday and says, "Sha'amevi gzelo ad shelo hevi ashamo," because we had learned that if a person is mevi gzelo ad shelo hevi ashamo, that's good. Money before korban is good. Korban before money is no good. How do we know this to be true? So says the Gemara, we'll learn over the next 5 lines how this is true. Amar Rava de Amar Kra, ha'asham hamushav la'Hashem la'kohen milvad ela kipur masher yechaper bo. And yesterday we learned, and rather uniquely, that the beginning of the pasuk that says ha'asham hamushav, we said that was talking about money and not an asham. I know that doesn't sound normal. Well, how do we know that? Because the rest of the pasuk says milvad ela kippurim, except for the ram of kapara. So therefore, asham hamushav in the beginning must be talking about Karen v'chomesh. So therefore, what do we see? Michlal de kesef bereisha. The pasuk seems to say that the monetary component of gezel hager, of the Karen and the chomesh, has to precede the havas hakorban. And Amar Ahume Rabbanan le Rava. Somebody said to Rava, Rava was the one who presented this answer, Elameata, if your diuk is that the end of the pasuk says milavad ela kippurim, then a pasuk that we all know, milavad olas haboker asher leolas hatamid. This was a pasuk that the korban musaf that would have been brought, that milvad olas haboker, except for the tamid that's brought, we also bring another korban. So what does that imply? Hachanami michlal de musafin bereisha. That's impossible. We know that the korban musaf cannot be brought before the resha. But if the diuk that you're making, Rava, over here is we know money comes before korban because of the word milvad, well, we have precedents in halacha where it's not that way, because we know that musaf can't come before shachris, because Ve'atanya, 8-9 lines from the bottom, last of the middle width lines. Minayin shelo yehei davar kodem l'tamid shal shachar. How do we know that the korban musaf could never precede the korban tamid shel shachar? Talmud Omer ve'arach aleh ha'olah. What does this pasuk mean? Ve'arach aleh ha'olah ve'amarava ha'olah olah rishona. That when it comes to the korban hatamid, nothing precedes the korban hatamid. And as well, quoted in Shulchan Aruch and in the poskim, one should be careful not to do their malacha before they daven. The korban hatamid, if tefillah is keneged korbanos tiknum, so then shachris is keneged the tamid. Nothing comes before that. You're not supposed to do your malacha before that. I actually did a bris once, and I messed up my timing, and I showed up at shachris when the bris was supposed to start. It's not the first time I've done that, and it's not the last time I've done that. I've done it twice. And I showed up. I mamish didn't have time to even be meniach tefillin. I did the bris. Pashut forgot that I didn't daven and ate a whole suda. I'm like schmoozing, having a good time, mazel tov, checking on the baby. And then like a ton of bricks, I realized I didn't say Shema. I realized I didn't daven. Shay gets the moel who skipped Shachris. It's not even from anymore. Okay. Nah, fast nicht. I worked in Eish HaTorah for 1 year. When I was there was a guy in Eish who said to me that when you're doing kiruv, when you're working for Eish, you don't have to daven mincha. I'm like, ever? What does that mean? He said, you're osek b'mitzvah, pater mina mitzvah. So at the time I was just out of smicha, and I called my Rebbe, Reb David Miller. I said, Rebbe, I'm no posek. This doesn't sound right. If somebody told me that you don't have to daven mincha if you're being... He's like, that is completely and utterly ridiculous. That is not what it means. That's not oseg b'mitzvah. Yes, you're being oseg b'mitzvah, but understood that you're going to take a break to daven. What does that mean? What if I'm always doing kiruv? From the moment I wake up until the moment I sleep, I'm putter from tefillin and everything. He's like, that's completely not right. What's that? But when you stop to put on tefillin, you're being mevatel the other mitzvah. So if we would have taka said, if it's true that we would have said osek b'mitzvah pater mina mitzvah, you're mamish pater. You are pater. But that's not the din. That's not what it means here. Osek. But when the person said it to me, I'm like, this doesn't sound right. I don't know. It didn't feel right. And my Rebbe I remember he was very sharp about it. He's like, that is completely incorrect. I remember where I was standing at a bus stop. I know where I was. One of those moments where you got like half yelled at by your Rebbe, even though it wasn't at you, but it was at the question that you shouldn't have even bothered asking because it was ridiculous. So the Gemara says that we see over here that one should not do anything before the korban hatamid, especially the musa. But even you can't get a haircut, ledugma. You can't work in the garden. You should daven shachris first thing in the morning. And the Gemara quotes a pasuk of lo sochlu al adam, that you shouldn't eat before your blood. Now, what does that mean? So there's 5 different sheets as to what this means. One of them is you cannot eat before you daven for your blood. It's a Gemara. The Gemara says that.
4 years ago.
Oh, I don't even remember where that was. That in Brachos? I don't even know. So the poskim here have a big discussion about eating before davening. The Hasidim are mekel. A lot of the Litvaks are very machmir. Coffee with sugar, coffee without sugar. These are all discussions. I went through a phase where on Shabbos mornings I would eat breakfast because for me, not having calories is bad for migraines. So I learned a new din. Rabbi Friedman told me, he's like, but you made kiddush, right? And I pasha didn't. This was probably 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I didn't realize that. If you're eating before davening on Shabbos, you have to make kiddush, like with wine or grape juice, regular kiddush. And you need to then eat a kazayis because ain't kiddush el b'makom suda. I'm totally flabbergasted, like just flew right over my head. I didn't even think about it. But when one does have a heter to eat before davening, I'm not talking about coffee, but to eat food, you can't just eat stam. You have to eat a kazayis b'chtei achilas pras with kiddush preceding. But malacha can never be done before. These are some of the Mara Makomos for not. Anyways, my point over here is that if milvad means what you think it means, then we have a problem because then it would have implied that Musaf is before the Tamid, which is definitely not true. Amar le, you're right. I have a better Mari Makom to teach me this idea that the asham has to become before the financial components, the exact opposite, that the financial components have to come before the asham. Anna, says the Gemara, me'asher yechaper bo nafkale ve'adayin lo kiper. The kapara is by korban. The zrikas hadam is the kapara. That's when it happens. Money first, kapara later. At the 2 dots, 6 lines before the end of the page, nasan lo es hakeren. We had said that if one gave the karen and they didn't give the chomesh, if I gave the principal cost, but I didn't give the slap on the wrist cost, the din is that it's not me'akid. Says the Gemara Tanu Rabbanon, minayin she'mehevi me'ila, so that if a person did me'ila and they had to pay that back, that when a person is repaying their me'ila, which is a misappropriation and a misuse of hektish, the lo hevi ashamo, or ashamo velo hevi me'ilas, so you're missing one of the two. Minayin, how do we know shelo yatsa? Talmud lomar, be'el asham v'nislach lo. Because of that pasuk, you need to do two things. You need to repay what you took by me'ilah, and you need a korban. How do we know as well that not only if you don't do both aren't you yotze, but that if you bring the asham before you repay the me'ilah, you're also not yotze. Talmud lomar be'el ha'asham ha'asham bikfar. That we know that the money has to come first. Now, yachal kishem she'ayel v'asham me'akven kachomesh me'akev. You might have thought that the chomesh was me'akev, that if I only pay the keren, but not the chomesh, it's le'ikuva. Talmud lomar, be'el ha'asham v'nislach lo, that's how we know that the chomesh is not me'akev. Ayel v'asham me'akven be'hektish. When it comes to the world of hektish, yes, the principle of what you did me'ilah on is me'akev, but ve'ein chomesh me'akev, the chomesh is not going to be le'ikuva. And still, that's only about me'ilah. How do we know about our case, about gezel, hager, that if I pay the keren and not the chomesh, I'm still doing okay, that it wasn't le'ikuva, and I still get the mitzvah of the heshiv esagzela? Says the Gemara, a shtickle chiddush. The yilmad hektish mehedyot, the hedyot mehektish. Uniquely, we have a bridge where we can learn hektish from the world of hedyot, which is rarely done, and as well the reverse, where we learn hedyot from hektish. Let's look at both. Hektish me hedyot. Where do we learn from me'ilah to the world of hedyot? Ma'asham dehasam keren. That when we have the world of gezel hager, there asham is talking about keren. Af asham dehacha. In this case, by me'ilah, it's also talking about keren. And the hedyot me hektish. What do we learn about hektish? Ma hektish by me'ilah ein chomesh me'akev. So to af hedyot nami ein chomesh me'akev. We therefore see that based on a limud of a pasuk, coupled with a limud from hektish to hedyot and hedyot to hektish, we therefore see that chomesh is not me'akev in the repayment of gezel hager. Hadron alacha godzel eitzim baruch Hashem. We finished the 9th perek of Maseches Bava Kama. We'll now start the 10th and final perek of Maseches Bava Kama as we turn to the top of Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Beis. Let us continue. We're going to be stopping at the top of Kuf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, and then tomorrow night we have apparently a lot of work to do. Okay. And Shabbos as well. Oi. Looking forward to Bava Basra though. No? I know. You shouldn't have done that. I was enjoying reveling in the 175 blot of Bava Kama for just a moment. Bava Basra. Okay, new perek. Hagozel, a person steals. Umachil is banav. I only steal what I cannot afford. It's a famed line from an old movie. So this, what? What I cannot afford. Gemara Makomos later. Let's go. The Gemara says, "Hagozil machil is banav." If a person steals and feeds their children, so I go to the store, I go to Jewel, I shoplift and I feed my children. V'hiniach lifneim, or one leaves it for their children, namely they left it biyerusha. This is a little bit of a homiletic kind of language. Patur milashalim. They're patur from paying. We'll discuss. If you stole something that has achrayis, which typically is understood as stealing karka or something that's connected to karka because of a lien, then pashat, you're obligated to pay because the karka was the lien for that item. The Gemara opens on the top of Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Beis, 3 lines down. Amar Rav Chizda. Gazal, let's say there was theft, and I fed it to my boys. V'lo nisyashu habaylim. But the person who I stole from was never misya'ish. He still held onto the hope that he would get his item back. Uva acher v'achlo, someone else took it from me and ate it. So I'm Ruvain the thief. And Shimon, the thief of the thief, stole from me and I stole from you. So what's the din? Rav Chizda says, Rata mizeh gove. You can come over either to me or Ruvain or to Shimon and say, I don't care who pays me back. One of you stole my stuff or both of you stole my stuff. Not my problem. You guys figure it out. Somebody owes me a loaf of bread. My taima. What is the reason why this is true? Because says the Gemara, Kol kama delonis yashua bailim, for as long as the owners did not relinquish their hope and desire to get back what was stolen, birshuse demarikai, that which Ruvain took, and therefore that which Shimon took from Ruvain and ate is still birshus bailim, and it is difficult to determine who the thief is. It's goned minaganav a little bit. It is. The Gemara doesn't paskin here who should do the paying, and the nigzal, can collect either from me, Ruvain, or from Shimon, who actually ate the food. Asks the Gemara, wait.
The second guy knew this was disabled?
No, he did.
And Ruvain stole the loaf of bread. Shimon then, I don't know, is he stealing it from Ruvain? Is Ruvain giving it from the gift?
There's a Rashi on the fourth line. Rashi says, Bezesha achlo, Shimon, in my example, Naasek goes let me buy love.
Naasek goes because he ended up eating it, but how did he get?
Let's talk it out. If he stole it innocently, right? I'm sorry, if he received it. No, but the case was not that way. Uba acher va'achlo. I assume, I didn't think about your question. I assumed that he took it. Why would you say that?
I'm not sure.
Because it doesn't say that he was godless.
No, I would have argued that if Shimon took from Ruvain and Shimon bought it from Ruvain, I would have argued that the person on the hook is Ruvain, not Shimon. I would have distinguished. Not like that. I would have distinguished. I didn't look into it. I don't know. Gozel machil.
It doesn't say that. It's not going to
Right, it's not
did
clear.
not,
What
yeah.
does it mean? He came by. What does it mean?
You could even kind of that he sold it.
You could.
Correct.
You
That is
could.
what I'm asking. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Is that a case?
I don't know. Uva acher. I think the second Tosfos touches on this, but I don't.
That's way too.
Yeah, and it also weaves in other parts of the Gemara.
Yeah, maybe it'll become.
Nope. Okay, good question. So says the Gemara, my taima, why is this true? Because it's still Birshusei the Baila Kaimi, the Mari Kaimi. So says the Gemara, we have a problem with this. Over here, in this case of Rav Chizda, what did we say? We said that they're not pater. So someone stole, and Ruvain gave it to Shimon, however Shimon got it. What did we say? Rav Chizda says, Gova mizeh, Gova mizeh. What did our Mishnah say? Pturin. To a very similar case. So it's not our Mishnah asks. Rav Chizda, what about our Gemara? So in our Mishnah, in a similar case where a father gave to his kids, so there our Mishnah says Ptur milashalim. But in this case with Rav Chizda, the Nigzal can come and claim either from Ruvain or from Shimon. That's a
Record. The kids didn't steal it from their father. Right. Yorship, cleanly.
Yeah, but they
So
might-
making a
but they-
comparison between the two.
but they might have known about it. Rashi has a little bit of a remez on the top line. Oshiniach lifneim and the Gzelas kayemes. I don't know if that's a raya, but what?
I'm not so sure.
No. Either way, the Gemara presents a stira. For tonight, I was at the NCSY dinner and I was talking to someone about Daf Yomi or Meir Simchas Shoma. It's Talmud Chacham. Very easy geschmack. And he and I agreed that with Bava Kama, when you're done with every daf, you're left with more questions than you started. In this Masechta, more than other Masechtas, because they're so meaty and it's like so every line requires perush. But it's true. Anyways, how do we solve the stira? Our Mishnah says pater. Rav Chizda says that the Nigzal can collect from either Ruvain or Shimon. Amar lach Rav Chizda, 10 lines down. Kitanya hahi le'achar yeyush. When did our Mishnah say Pturin milashalem? That's only le'achar yeyush. But the case of Rav Chizda clearly stipulated was a case of lifnei yeyush, because it says Gazal balonis yashu abaylim. Now we should have been able to guess this answer because our Mishnah didn't speak about Yeush, and Rav Chizda articulated that it was a case of Yeush. At the 2 dots, 1/4 of the way down. We said in our Mishnah that if it was placed before them, this language is actually slightly different than our Mishnah. The im hiniach and not vihiniach. The im hiniach is a little different, but not much in the actual explanation. Either way, they're pater. Amarami barchama zosameres. Rishus Yoresh ki Rishus Lokeach Dami, that the child now owns this, meaning the transition from the father to the child means that the child now owns this, ad kedei kach, that they're pater, meaning that a real kinyan happened when the father left over the Yerusha. How do we know? Because he's pater. If it still belonged to the father, even though the father is dead, but you'd have to give it back to the nigzal. But over here, what does our Mishnah say? That hiniach lifnem yerptur min l'shalim. That teaches us that the rishus yoresh is similar to an actual kinyan of a lokeach. I bought it; it's mine. Namely, there was a kinyan. What was the kinyan? Shinui rishus. The father passed away, and biyerusha it was shinui rishus to the child. That mamish has the status of a lakicha, of a purchase. It's ke'ilu, I laid out money on the table, you gave me the item in return, shalom Yisrael, I own it now. However, Rava Amar, third of the way down, Rishus Yoresh Lav Kirshus Lokeach Dami V'Acha B'Mayaskinan Kisha Achlum. The cases are not level cases. Rava says you cannot learn from this Mishnah that Rishus Yoresh is Kirshus Lokeach, because in this case, the children consumed the food. I don't understand why this is a good argument. If the children consumed gzela, they should pay back the cost of the food. So why is Rava? They weren't the ones stealing. They're the ones who ate it. But either way, even if that's true, we should still have said that it's rishus, that, what was the language? That rishus yoresh is kirishus lokech. That's not what the Gemara argues. I'm just asking a side question. Anyways, the Gemara says that this is a problem. You can't say, Rava, that the ukimta of the case of Rav Chizda is a case of kisha achlum. Why? Because amid the katani seifa, later we have the following. Im haya davar sheyesh bo achrayis chayav l'shalom. That's the end of our Mishnah. That Kisha Achlum is talking not about Rav Chizda, but about our Mishnah, that when it says P'tur Milashalom, that's because they ate the food. Says the Gemara, you cannot establish our Mishnah as having been Kisha Achlum. Why not? Because the Seifa, which is talking about something which is Yesh Bo Achrayis, if you wanted to create a contrast between the Reisha and Seifa, don't go so strong as to say that it's something that you stole that as achrayis. Just say it's something that exists, because the Reisha was k'sha'achlum. Elamai, it must be mechlal the Reisha b'gzela kayemes askina, not talking about b'sha'achlum. So Rava, your answer doesn't work. Amar lach Rava hachi kamar. Really, you misunderstood our Mishnah. Im hiniach lehem avin achrayis nechasim chayavin l'shalem. What the Seifa means is that it's a little bit different than our language. Our language in our Mishnah on the second line was im haya davar sheyesh bo achrayis. That's not correct. Really, the right way to read our Mishnah, halfway down, is amar lach Rava hachi kamar im hiniach lemavim achrayis nechasim, which is actually karka, then chayavin l'shalem. That's different than our understanding of our Mishnah. V'hamasni le Rebbe le Reb Shimon berei lo davar sheish b'achrayis mamish ela filu para v'chol reish ba. You can't say that our Mishnah is talking about actual property. Maybe it's only talking about a cow that you plow with, or chamar umechamer acharav, or it's a donkey and you do things like you would do with a donkey, that they would carry packages. Then chayav l'achzim lekavad aviyah. That's different. Over there, we would say those are obligated to be brought back, even though it's not karka. So now you can't even say, Rava, that the seif of our Mishnah is talking about actual karka sheish b'achrayis. Amar Rava ki shchivna. Rava says about himself that when he dies, Rav Oshaya nafik levasi. This is already like heebie-jeebies. Rava says that when he dies, that Rav Oshaya is going to greet him at the white pearly gates. Why? Because I explained the Mishnah that it was talking about karka, just like Rav Oshaya did. Wow. Detani Rav Oshaya, Hagozelu machil is ban after milashalim, a quote from our Mishnah. And then what's the seifa according to Rav Oshaya, the seifa of our Mishnah? Says the Gemara 8 lines from the bottom, that if the father left it as a Yerusha, if the gzela is kayemes chayovin, en gzela kayemes pturin. If the food exists, if the item exists, then no problem, you're obligated to pay it back. The children have to pay it back. If the kids ate all the food, then they don't have to pay it back. Same exact lashon that Rava said, chayavin l'shalem, end of brisa. So what do we see from over here? That Rava has a gorgeous Mari Makom in Rav Oshaya to reinterpret our Mishnah, and the therefore is that we cannot say definitively that Rishus Yoresh is kirishus lokeach, because our Mishnah was talking about karka, so it wasn't a regular case to learn from, and perhaps what the Gemara was recommending in the name of Rami Bar Chama, that Rishus Yorish is Rishus Lokeach, is actually not true. Let's just analyze two parts of the Mishnah, and then we'll stop at the top line of Kuf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, Omar Mar. We had said in our Mishnah, Ein ha'gzela kayemes p'turin, that in the Rav Oshaya version of the Brisa, that if the gzela was no longer in existence, you're putter. So neima tabet yufta de Rav Chizda. That should be an argument against Rav Chizda, because Rav Chizda, at the open of our Gemara, on the third and fourth lines of this page, he had said that Ratzami Zegova, why wouldn't you be putter? That case was talking about Achar Yeush. That's why you're putter. But in Rav Chizda's case, it was Lifnei Yeush. And one more analysis, Omar Mar. We had also said in this brisa that we just saw that Gzela Kayemes Chayav and L'Shalim. Also, Rav Oshaya's brisa that Rava quoted, that if the Gzela was Kayemes, if that which was stolen is still intact, so then you have to pay Neima Tavatiyufta de Rami Bar Chama. That should be a tiyufta of Rami Bar Chama. Because what does Gzela Kayemes Chayav and L'Shalim mean? That means that Rishus Yoresh is not Kirshus Lokeach. Why? Because here we have a Yerusha, and the child still has to pay, which means the child doesn't own the item, which means that Rishus, that, what's the language? The Rishus Yoresh is clearly not like a purchase. Because if it was, he'd be pater, but we're saying he's chayav to be l'shalim. Ne'matav to do to Rami Bar Chama, who says that Rishus Yoresh is Kirshus Lokeach. Says the Gemara, last line on the Amud of Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. Amar lach Rami Bar Chama kitan yahi lifnei yeyush. It depends. When it's lifnei yeyush, so then there's one din. When it's le'achar yeyush, so then there is another din. That's why there's no stira against Rami Bar Chama. We'll stop right here. Emir Tashem, tomorrow night we'll pick up with Kuf Yud Beis and Kuf Yud Beis Amud on Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, or at least a chunk of it. Maybe we'll try to get to the Mishnah on Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.